After my retirement, my daughter-in-law handed me a list of rules I had to follow, and I still remember the exact way she smiled when she gave it to me, like she was handing me a gift instead of a leash. My name is Winifred. I am 83 years old, and I taught elementary school for 41 years before I finally hung up my chalk and my grading pens for good. On the day I retired, my colleagues threw me a little party in the teacher's lounge. There were paper cups of lemonade, a sheet cake with my name spelled wrong, and a card signed by children who probably don't remember me anymore. I drove home that evening with the windows down, feeling lighter than I had felt in years. I thought the hardest chapter of my life was behind me. I did not know the hardest chapter was only just beginning. Before I tell you about the rules, you should know a little about who I was before all of this happened, because it matters. I was not always a quiet old woman folding laundry in silence. I stood in front of 30 children every single September for 41 years, and I learned how to make even the most stubborn child sit still and listen. I learned how to spot a lie before it finished leaving a small mouth. I learned patience, real patience, the kind that does not come naturally to anyone, but is built, brick by brick, over decades of practice. I raised Edward mostly on my own during the years Arthur traveled for work, teaching all day and coming home to cook dinner, check homework, and tuck one tired boy into bed every single night. I tell you this not to boast, but so that you understand that the woman who eventually stood in that dark hallway listening to her daughter-in-law plan her disappearance was not some fragile, helpless creature. She was a woman who had spent her whole life being strong for other people, and who had simply forgotten, for a little while, how to be strong for herself. My husband, Arthur, passed away 6 years before that. Cancer took him slowly, the way it takes most people, stealing a little more of him every month until there was nothing left but his voice and his stubborn love for me. After he was gone, I kept the house for a while, but it grew too big, too quiet, too full of memories that made my chest ache every time I walked past his reading chair. So when my son, Edward, suggested I move in with him and his wife, Ashley, I thought it was the kindest offer anyone had made me in years. I sold my house. I gave most of the money to Edward, because he told me it would help pay off their mortgage faster, and because what does an old woman need with that much money anyway, I thought. I kept only what I needed for my medications and a little pocket money, and I moved into the small guest room at the back of their house, the one that used to be a storage room before they cleared it out for me. The first week was lovely. Ashley made me tea in the mornings. She asked me how I slept. She told her friends over the phone that having Grandma Winifred in the house was such a blessing for the children. I believed her. I wanted to believe her, because I was lonely, and loneliness makes you trust people faster than you should. Then, exactly 9 days after I moved in, Ashley knocked on my door holding a single sheet of paper, printed neatly, with a little border of flowers around the edges like it was an invitation to a garden party instead of what it actually was. She sat on the edge of my bed, patted my hand, and said, "Winifred, now that you're retired and living here full-time, I think it's best if we set some house rules just so everyone knows what's expected." "For harmony," she said. "For harmony." I looked at that paper and my heart sank slowly, the way a stone sinks in a pond, not with a splash but with a quiet, steady descent. The rules were written in her handwriting, but they read like a contract drawn up by a stranger who did not like me very much. Rule number 1. I was not allowed to eat in the kitchen or dining room after 6 in the evening, because that was family time, and apparently I was not quite family enough to share it. Rule number 2, I was to keep my bedroom door closed at all times so the children would not wander in and, in her words, disturb my things. Rule number 3, I was not permitted to give the grandchildren any snacks, treats, opinions, or bedtime stories without her direct approval first. Rule number 4, I was expected to do the family's laundry, folding included, 3 times a week, since I was, after all, not working anymore and had, in her words, plenty of free time on my hands. Rule number 5, I was not to speak about Arthur at the dinner table, because it made things awkward and sad for the children. Rule number 6, I was to keep the thermostat exactly where Ashley set it, because my old bones apparently could just wear a sweater if I felt cold. There were 11 rules in total, each one smaller and crueler than the last, each one designed, whether she meant it that way or not, to remind me that I was a guest in a house I had helped pay for, a burden being tolerated rather than a mother being loved. I did not cry in front of her. I have never been a woman who cries easily, not even at Arthur's funeral, not even when the doctor first said the word cancer to me like it was an ordinary word and not a bomb. I simply folded the paper, thanked her for being so organized, and told her I would do my best to follow along. She smiled, satisfied, and left my room, and only then did I sit on the edge of my bed and let my hands shake for a long, long while. I want you to understand something before I go further. I did not raise my son to marry a cruel woman, and I do not believe, even now, that Ashley started out cruel. I think some people become unkind slowly, the way water wears down stone, not all at once, but through years of small choices that nobody stops to question. Ashley grew up in a house where her own grandmother had been, by her account, difficult and demanding, and I think somewhere along the way she decided that all old women eventually become a burden, and she was simply preparing for mine before it even happened. That does not excuse what she did. It only explains it, and there is a difference between explaining something and forgiving it, though I would eventually have to do both. For the first few months, I followed her rules like a good tenant. I ate my dinner alone in my room at 5:30, a plate covered in foil left outside my door like I was a dog waiting to be fed. I kept my door shut even when I longed to hear the children's laughter drifting down the hallway. I did the laundry, all of it, even Edward's work shirts and Ashley's expensive blouses that could only be washed a certain way. And my hands, which used to hold a piece of chalk with such steady confidence, grew red and cracked from the detergent. I said nothing about Arthur, not once, though there were nights I wanted so badly to tell someone, anyone, about the way he used to hum while he shaved, or the way he called me his girl even when I was 75 years old and gray as a winter sky. There were other small moments too, the kind that do not sound like much on their own, but pile up quietly until they crush something inside you. There was the afternoon Ashley hosted her book club and introduced me to her friends simply as the help who watches the kids sometimes, not as Edward's mother, not as anyone's grandmother, just the help. I stood there holding a tray of lemon squares I had baked myself that morning, smiling, saying nothing, because what was there to say in front of 6 strangers sipping wine in my son's living room? There was the family photograph taken for their holiday card that year, the one that still sits on their mantel, in which I am conspicuously absent, cropped out, Ashley later explained. Because the frame was only meant for the immediate family. There was the Sunday I asked, gently, if I might join them for church, since I had gone every week of my life before moving in, and Ashley told me the pews were getting crowded lately, and perhaps I would be more comfortable resting at home instead. Each of these moments alone I could have forgiven, did forgive, told myself was simply a misunderstanding, a busy woman's carelessness rather than cruelty. But moments like that do not stay alone for long. They gather. My son, Edward, worked long hours at his firm downtown, and he came home most nights too tired to notice the quiet war happening inside his own house. I did not tell him about the rules at first. I told myself I was protecting him from having to choose between his mother and his wife. But the truth, if I am honest with myself now, is that I was ashamed. I was ashamed that at 83 years old, after everything I had built, after every child I had taught, every lesson I had given, every sacrifice I had made, I had been reduced to a woman who ate alone behind a closed door because her daughter-in-law found her inconvenient. The turning point came on a Tuesday evening in October. I remember it was raining, the kind of steady rain that makes the whole world sound like it is whispering. I had gone downstairs quietly, past 9 o'clock, long after the children were asleep, because I could not sleep myself and I wanted a glass of warm milk the way my own mother used to make for me. I did not turn on the lights out of habit, and that is how I came to overhear Ashley on the phone with her sister in the kitchen, her voice low but not low enough. She was talking about me. She said the words that I will never forget as long as I live. She said, I don't know how much longer I can have her here. She's slowing everything down, and honestly Edward's inheritance would go a lot further without her eating into it every month. She said there was a nice facility 2 towns over, clean, affordable, and that once things settled she was going to bring it up gently to Edward, frame it as being for my own good, for my safety, for my comfort in my golden years. She laughed a little when she said golden years, like it was a joke between her and her sister, like my entire remaining life was a punchline. I stood in that dark hallway with my hand pressed against the cold wall, and something inside me that had been quietly bending for months finally, calmly, without any drama at all, decided it would bend no further. I did not confront her that night. I want you to understand that what I did next was not born from anger, though I certainly had every right to be angry. It was born from clarity. 41 years of teaching children how to think had taught me one very important lesson myself, which is that the loudest reaction is rarely the smartest one. So I went back to my room, and I sat awake until the sun rose, and I made a plan, the same way I used to plan a school year, step by careful step. I thought about every child I had ever taught who came from a difficult home, and how the ones who turned out best were never the ones who were punished the hardest, but the ones who were shown, patiently and consistently, a better way to be. I thought about Arthur, and what he would have said if he had been sitting beside me on the edge of that bed. He was never a man who raised his voice either. He used to say that a quiet man who knows exactly what he wants is far more dangerous, in the best sense of that word, than a loud man who is only guessing. I decided that night that I would be quiet, and I would know exactly what I wanted, and what I wanted was not revenge in the way the world usually means it. I did not want to see Ashley crumble, or humiliated or cast out into the street. I wanted, more than anything, for my son's house to become a home again, and for that to happen, something in it had to change. And I understood by sunrise that the changing would have to start with me. I made myself a cup of tea in the small kettle I kept hidden in my room, since the kitchen after 6 was forbidden territory, and I watched the gray light turn gold outside my window, and I felt something I had not felt in months, which was purpose. Not anger exactly. Something steadier than anger. Something closer to resolve. The first thing I did was call my nephew, Charles, who happened to be a lawyer, and I asked him to quietly review the paperwork from when I sold my house and gave the money to Edward. It turned out, and I had genuinely forgotten this in my grief and my trust, that I had insisted, back when Arthur was still alive and we drew up our wills together, that any money given to our children for the house would be recorded as a loan against the property, not a gift, specifically to protect me in situations exactly like this one. Ashley did not know that. Edward, in the chaos of losing his father and settling the estate, had genuinely forgotten it too. The second thing I did was start writing things down. Every meal left outside my door. Every rule enforced. Every comment made in front of the children about Grandma being tired, or old, or in the way. I did not do this out of spite. I did it because I have learned in 83 years on this earth that memory fades but paper does not, and I wanted the truth to have a record, whatever I decided to do with it. The third thing I did was the hardest. I began, very quietly, being kind. Not fake kind, not performing kindness for an audience, but genuinely, deliberately kind in ways that made no sense to Ashley at all. I complimented her cooking, even the meals that were clearly overdone. I offered to watch the children on the nights she wanted to go out with her friends, and when she hesitated, remembering her own rule about me and the grandchildren, I gently reminded her that I had raised her husband successfully into the man she married, and perhaps I could be trusted with his children for one evening. She agreed, reluctantly, and that evening became the first crack in the wall she had built around our family. I did not tell the children complaints about their mother. I simply loved them the way I had always wanted to, quietly, patiently, the way a grandmother is supposed to. I taught my granddaughter, little Grace, how to bake shortbread the way my own mother taught me. I taught my grandson, young Thomas, how to whistle properly, tongue behind the teeth, the way Arthur taught me on our third date, 70 years before he died. The children began asking for me. They began knocking on my closed door, rules or no rules, wanting to know if Grandma Winifred could tell them just one more story before bed. There was one evening in particular I will never forget from that quiet season. Young Thomas had a school project due. A small model of the solar system made from foam balls and wire, and he came to my door in tears because he had left it too late and did not understand how the planets were supposed to be spaced apart. Ashley's rule said I was not to help the children with anything without her approval, but she was out that evening at a work dinner, and Edward was buried in paperwork downstairs, and there was a small, frightened boy standing in my doorway with foam balls in his hands. I opened my door. We sat on my bedroom floor until nearly 10 o'clock, measuring string and painting Saturn's rings with glitter glue. And when Ashley came home and found us there, flour and glitter everywhere, Thomas asleep against my shoulder, She did not scold me. She stood in the doorway for a long moment, and something in her face softened in a way I had not seen since the very first week I moved in. She simply picked Thomas up, careful not to wake him, and as she carried him to bed, she said quietly, "Thank you," over her shoulder. And I do not think either of us fully understood yet how much those two small words meant. Ashley noticed. Of course she noticed. And I could see it beginning to unsettle her, the way her carefully built rules were starting to crumble, not because I broke them in anger, but because love, real and patient and undeniable, does not follow rules written on a piece of paper with a flowery border. The confrontation, when it finally came, was not something I orchestrated dramatically at a dinner table in front of horrified guests. Though I admit some smaller, more tired part of me had imagined exactly that kind of scene more than once during those long, lonely evenings behind my closed door. Instead, it happened on a quiet Sunday afternoon when Edward finally asked me directly why I seemed so different lately, softer somehow, and yet somehow sadder too, and I realized the moment had simply arrived on its own, the way true moments usually do. I told him everything. The rules. The dinners eaten alone. The overheard phone call about the facility 2 towns over. I did not raise my voice. I did not cry, though my voice did shake once or twice. I simply laid it all out for him the way I used to lay out a lesson plan, clearly, honestly, without embellishment, because the truth needed no embellishment at all. My son sat very still for a long time after I finished speaking. Then he called Ashley into the room, and he asked her, in front of me, whether what I had said was true. I will give Ashley this much credit, and it is not nothing, she did not lie. She sat down, her hands folded tightly in her lap, and she admitted to all of it, the rules, the phone call, the quiet plan for the facility. She said she thought she was protecting their future, protecting the children's inheritance, protecting the peace of her home. She said the words that so many people say when they are finally caught doing something they knew, deep down, was wrong. She said, "I didn't think of it as unkind. I thought of it as necessary." Edward turned to look at me then, and I have never seen my son's face carry so many emotions at once. There was hurt, for me and for his marriage both. There was anger, simmering just beneath his calm exterior. And there was something else too, something I recognized immediately because I had felt it myself so many times over the years, a kind of exhausted love, the love you carry for people even when they disappoint you, even when you wish, just for a moment, that you did not love them quite so much. He asked Ashley how long she had been planning this. She admitted it had been on her mind for nearly 2 months, ever since a conversation with her own mother about how expensive elder care would eventually become if they waited too long to plan for it. Edward asked why she had never once brought it to him directly, why she had chosen instead to write rules and make quiet phone calls behind closed doors. Ashley did not have a good answer for that. She simply said, "I didn't know how to bring it up without sounding like a terrible person, and I suppose I decided it was easier to just handle it quietly." I remember thinking, in that moment, how many terrible things in this world are done quietly, precisely because the person doing them already knows, somewhere inside, that they would never survive being said out loud in front of the people they love. I could have used that moment to destroy her. I had the paperwork from Charles showing that the house was legally still partly mine. I had my written record of every small cruelty. I had my son's stunned, wounded expression, ready to take my side completely if I asked him to. I could have demanded she leave, or demanded my money back with interest, or told the children the truth about their mother in a way that would have colored their opinion of her forever. Revenge, in that moment, was mine for the taking, fully and completely, and I confess to you now that some tired, hurt part of my heart wanted exactly that. But I am 83 years old, and if 4 decades in a classroom taught me anything, it is that punishment rarely teaches a lesson, but understanding almost always does. So instead of destroying her, I did something else. I asked Ashley to sit with me, alone, without Edward, without an audience, without any performance for anyone else's benefit. And I told her about my own mother-in-law, decades ago, a woman named Constance who had been cold and demanding to me in exactly the ways Ashley had been cold and demanding to me now. And how I had sworn, as a young wife, that I would never become a burden the way I felt Constance saw me. I told Ashley that fear does strange things to people, makes them build walls where bridges would serve them better, makes them write rules instead of asking questions. I told her I forgave her, not because what she did was acceptable, but because holding on to that hurt would cost me more than it would ever cost her. And I did not have enough years left to spend any of them being bitter. Ashley cried then, really cried, the kind of crying that comes from somewhere old and unresolved, and she apologized in a way that felt real rather than convenient. She tore up the list of rules herself, right in front of me, and we sat together and wrote a new list, this time together, this time as two women trying to build a family instead of defend territory. The new list was simple. Sunday dinners together always, no exceptions. My door open unless I chose otherwise. The grandchildren allowed to love me without permission slips. And one rule that made us both laugh through our tears, that Ashley was no longer allowed to fold laundry, because it turned out she was quite terrible at it, and I had been secretly redoing half of it anyway. In the weeks that followed, something shifted in that house that I can only describe as the air itself changing. Ashley began knocking on my door not to remind me of a rule, but simply to ask if I wanted company. She started bringing me my tea in the mornings again, the way she had that very first week, except now it felt real instead of rehearsed. One evening, about a month after everything came out into the open, she sat with me in the kitchen, the very kitchen I had once been forbidden from after 6 o'clock, and she asked me to tell her about Arthur. Really asked, with her whole attention, no phone in her hand, no half-listening while she thought about something else. I told her about the way he used to hum while he shaved, off-key and completely unashamed of it. I told her about the way he called me his girl, even when I was 75 years old. Ashley cried a little that night too, and she told me she wished she had known him. And I told her that in some small way, through Edward, through his patience and his quiet steadiness and even his terrible humming in the shower, she already did. Edward and Ashley began seeing a counselor together not long after, not because their marriage was in danger exactly, but because Edward said he wanted to understand how so much had happened right under his roof without him noticing, and he did not want that kind of blindness to happen again, in any direction. I was proud of him for that. It takes a certain kind of courage for a grown man to admit he was not paying close enough attention to the people he loves most. It has been 3 years since that Sunday afternoon. Ashley and I are not perfect, no two women sharing a kitchen ever are, but we are honest with each other now. And honesty, I have found, is worth far more than harmony that is only skin deep. Edward tells me sometimes that having me in the house was the best decision he ever made, though I suspect he means the version of it that came after the rules were torn up, not the version that came before. Little Grace still asks me to bake shortbread with her every Sunday, and young Thomas can now whistle better than his grandfather ever could. And I like to think Arthur is somewhere laughing about that, proud in the way he always used to be. I share this story with you not because I want you to be angry at Ashley, or angry at any daughter-in-law, or any family member who has ever made you feel small in your own golden years. I share it because I want you to know that dignity does not disappear when your hair turns white or when your body slows down. It only waits, patiently, for you to remember it is still yours. And I want you to know that forgiveness is not weakness. It is the strongest thing I have ever done in my long life. Stronger than raising a son alone during Arthur's final year. Stronger than 41 years standing in front of restless children trying to teach them something that would matter. Forgiveness, real forgiveness, chosen on purpose, is a gift you give yourself as much as anyone else, and I would choose it again every single time, without hesitation, because bitterness never once kept an old woman warm on a cold night, but a full table and a forgiven heart always has. Sometimes, on quiet evenings now, Ashley sits with me on the back porch while the children play in the yard, and we do not talk about rules or schedules or anything that needs managing at all. We simply watch the sun go down together, two women who once stood on opposite sides of a closed door, now sitting side by side on the same porch step. She asked me once, not long ago, why I never told Edward sooner, why I carried it all alone for so many months before it finally broke open. I told her the truth, which is that I was afraid of being a burden, afraid of causing trouble in a house that had already given me shelter, afraid that speaking up would only prove her right about me. She held my hand when I said that, and she told me she was sorry, truly sorry, not for being caught, but for ever making a woman like me feel she had to earn her place at her own family's table. I think about that conversation often. I think about how much pain in this world comes not from cruelty itself, but from silence, from good people staying quiet because they are afraid of becoming inconvenient. I do not stay quiet anymore, not about the things that matter, and neither, I am glad to say, does Ashley. Now, before you go, I would love to know, where in the world are you watching this from tonight? Go on and write your city down in the comments below. I read every single one of them with my tea in the morning, and it warms this old heart of mine more than you know. And if this story reminded you even a little of your own grandmother, or your own mother, or perhaps even reminded you of yourself, then please, go ahead and like this video. Subscribe so we can sit together again soon, and share it with a friend who needs to hear tonight that it is never too late to choose grace over grudges. Until next time, my dears, take care of the elders in your life, take care of yourselves too, and remember that it is never, ever too late for a family to find its way back to gentleness. Good night and sleep very well indeed, wherever in this wide, wonderful world you happen to be sitting tonight. My very own dear, wonderful friends, bye-bye.